And going to Davis again, underthrown, and this time it's picked off. A one-handed interception by Andrew Booth.
Go Tigers.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back once again to another episode of Upset Alert. It is episode number 77 of the Ultimate College Football Podcast, celebrating all 130 teams in FBS. We are coming at you here on a Thursday afternoon around 1:30 p.m. We're recording live here on twitch.tv/robotbraineater to preview Week 6 in college football. It is a big weekend because we've got 4 big ranked matchups, not to mention, I think, some tests, some tricky games for some other ranked teams in here as well, which is why I've decided to title this week's episode, Separating the Men from the Boys. I think that is what this weekend in college football is going to be about. I think it's an early point of separation for conferences like the SEC, who started a little later than the rest. In terms of, you look at Georgia and Tennessee, for example, as a big ranked matchup in the SEC. Of course, Florida and Texas A&M, a big kind of East versus West litmus test as well this weekend. And then you also look beyond that at, of course, our marquee ACC matchup this weekend, Clemson and Miami. There is a lot to talk about in previewing this Week 6 slate. There really are a lot of highlights to hit on here. This is, I think, a pretty exciting week in terms of the top end, at least. The best games of the weekend this weekend are some of the best we have seen to this point in the season. But we'll, of course, get to all of that in just a moment. First of all, I want to thank you for joining us. For those of you who are here live in the chat at twitch.tv/robotbraineater. Of course, if you want to watch live, that is where you can follow us and get that email notification as soon as we go live to record here on Twitch. Of course, right after these episodes get uploaded to YouTube, and then later to podcast services around the world as well. For today's episode, as I normally do for Thursday episodes, I will upload these to podcast services right after I'm recording, so they'll be up. Should be sometime this afternoon, so that you all can listen to my predictions before Thursday night football. So that being said, we're going to jump right into it here this week. Let's take a look at this Week 6 schedule and just see what we're working with, right? We've got one game tonight at 7:30 on ESPN. We've got one tomorrow, and then a big slate of games, as you can see here on video, on Saturday. So let's just jump right into it here. Get right into some predictions, and as promised, before we wrap up this episode, I will get back into a little bit of Pac-12 schedule discussion as we started to hint at the tail end of Monday's episode. So let's get into this here. And first of all, do just want to plug one final thing, I guess, as well, before we get to going too well here. For those of you who don't already, please do give us a follow at Upset Alert Pod on Twitter. If you'd want to turn on our tweet notifications on Saturdays especially, that is when we are most active on that Twitter account, posting regular score updates for all the big games. So if you want to just keep an eye on what's close, what should I be switching the channel to right now, or just if you're at work, that kind of thing on this Saturday, what are the score updates? At Upset Alert Pod on Twitter has you covered there. We tweet out all those score updates throughout the games on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, depending on how these Thursday and Friday night games go, of course. But we keep our eye on all the interesting games, and kind of give you a regular update. Normally on Saturdays, about every half hour. Thursday and Friday, obviously, one game, a little less regularly normally. But But yeah, we do that and we retweet and share, of course, all the big college football news of the world. We won't get into too much detail on it today, but we did see the Mid-American Conference announce their full schedule this past week. So shouts to the MAC giving us some details. Looks like they are pretty much following that Pac-12 model of a 6-week regular season plus that 7th game being the conference championship / Champions Week. They're calling it in the Pac-12, I believe, where each team in the conference will play a 7th game there. So pretty exciting stuff. Of course, we're right around the corner later this month, just a couple weeks really now at this point. The Big Ten will be rejoining the fray. We'll have some Big Ten football to talk about, and not just in a theoretical way. And then, of course, right after that, we've got Pac-12, MAC, Mountain West joining the party as well. But in the meantime, like I said, plenty of good football to talk about. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. For tonight's game, Tulane at Houston at 7:30 on ESPN. This one is a little bit of a coin flip type game for me. I don't mind this Houston football team. They have had so many false starts, I would say, at the beginning of this season, with so many of their games getting postponed due to COVID-19 concerns. I've got to give an edge to Tulane in this game for that reason. The Green Wave has been a pretty decent football team this year. Not to mention they have more experience, right? I mean, in this season, this weird season that we're experiencing, Tulane has played more games, simply put, and I like Tulane for that reason. I give them a slight edge. Friday night, we've got Louisville at Georgia Tech. Now, interestingly enough, I've been trying to keep an eye a little more than I have in the past, I suppose, on point spreads. And the point spread in this one was a little shocking to me, a little surprising. Louisville was at one point, I believe when I first looked earlier on in the week, was at about a 5.5 point favorite. The line has actually come even closer. I know that they say when things change in Vegas odds and they don't make sense, it's because Vegas knows something you don't. I know that is the popular take that a lot of people have. That may be the case. That very well may be the case. But I don't know what they could possibly be seeing in this Georgia Tech team to make them think that they are going to be within 3 or 4 points of this Louisville Cardinal team. That looks like easy money to me. I think this Louisville football team, despite, of course, last week, the injury to Malik Cunningham, I think this is still a dynamic offense. I think Louisville puts up a lot of points on a pretty poor, shall we say, pretty subpar Georgia Tech team. I think Louisville scores a lot of points in this football game still. So 7 p.m. on ESPN Friday. If you want to try to, I think, make some easy money, of course, take that with a grain of salt. I have not been so sharp on my picks the last couple of weeks here. Saturday, we're going to roll right into this full slate here, and it is, as always, in chronological order. We're just reading these straight off the ESPN website. We've got number 4, Florida at Texas A&M, and actually, let me back up real quick. I am just going to throw in here UAB at Rice. One game postponed this weekend to this point, of course, subject to change. More could happen. We did see the University of Louisiana having to postpone a game as well. I'm not sure why that isn't officially marked on here, but that game will be played next week, I believe it is, between Louisiana and Coastal Carolina. Actually, a very big Sun Belt matchup that got pushed this weekend due to Hurricane, I believe, what is it, Delta, I believe we're on at this point. Quite an active tropical season, I suppose, as we're now getting into the Greek alphabet. But you see that game has been affected by that. Some of these games that are in that kind of Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, in that general area, you're going to see some of those games perhaps affected by some bad weather conditions, though maybe not as serious as the Raging Cajuns situation, for example, in which they had to relocate the game. You will see later on in here when we get to LSU and Missouri, that game was relocated to Columbia rather than Baton Rouge for weather-related reasons. And so for that, you'll see we don't have a TV network yet listed for that one. But regardless, we roll on. Number 4, Florida at number 21, Texas A&M. That is the noon ESPN game this weekend. This is an interesting one. This is an interesting one to me for the following reason. You know, if you've been listening to this show lately, that I am not super high on Texas A&M. While I'm not quite as high on Florida as some people around the country are, I'm not prepared to call this team a college football playoff contender because they have literally, from what we've seen through 2 games, zero defense. I mean, their defense has been awful. As incredible as their offense has been, their defense has been equally bad. They have nearly given up as many yards as they have gained, and that is not a good sign for this team going forward for some of the tougher offenses they are going to play. Now, while this Texas A&M offense has not put up any flashy numbers yet, this is a team that is capable of scoring points. We know that Kellen Mond is capable of throwing the football at times, at least. We know that he can be a playmaker. We know that Jimbo Fisher, despite what he's shown to this point in the season, has had good coaching moments in the past. I don't know if he's still got that, honestly, at this point. But Jimbo Fisher and Texas A&M are capable of scoring points. And this Florida Gators defense, simply put, is awful through 2 games. There's a possibility that they could show us something here. You know, they could show us something and show out against Texas A&M, because I do think Texas A&M is not incredible by any stretch of the imagination. I did predict this in the preseason to be a 5-5 team this year. I do think Florida ultimately gets the win here, but the Gators need to watch out. I would say keep your head on a swivel. I know Texas A&M looked bad against Alabama. I know they looked really bad against Vanderbilt 2 weeks ago. But watch out for Texas A&M here. They're going to try to bounce back in this game. And Florida, I think, is cocky already. It was interesting. It was an interesting week of off-season chatter because you didn't see outside linebacker, Georgia transfer to Florida, Brenton Cox. You didn't see him talking about Texas A&M. He was talking about Georgia. Why are you talking about Georgia? That's a few weeks away when you've got number 21 Texas A&M staring you dead in the face. This game's at Kyle Field. Don't forget, I know it's limited attendance and things like that, but the Florida Gators, if they are looking past this game, could be in trouble. Again, I'm not going to predict that Florida loses this game, but this one might not be as easy as you would think based on the way A&M has looked through 2 weeks and based on the way that Florida offense has been looking through a couple of games. Moving right along, we've got a big ACC matchup here. Number 19, Virginia Tech at number 8, North Carolina, noon on ABC. Let me first make a maybe not so bold statement. That number 8 next to North Carolina is not going to stay there. That is way, way too far up there for the Tar Heels. For me, especially based just on what they've done on the field this season. I understand the hype levels are there. But Virginia Tech's a good football team. North Carolina's a good football team. I think these two teams are a lot closer than number 19 and number 8. I think they're more likely both down in that number 19-ish range. I am going to give the slight edge to North Carolina, I think, in this game. I do think, as I said, they're both good football teams. But just based on the fact that I believe we've seen a little more of North Carolina, I guess, this point, even though they have not been very sexy at times, I'm going to give the slight edge to the Tar Heels at home. I think they pick up the win over the Hokies this weekend. That one, though, that one is a coin flip to me. We've got number 17 LSU playing Missouri. They're at Mizzou, as I said earlier, due to the weather changing things up on them. This is currently scheduled as a noon game. The time, I believe, is up in the air as well. The TV network certainly up in the air here. I like LSU in this football game, and I like them by a whole lot, regardless of the circumstances, moving it up into Missouri. I think LSU showed last weekend against a far inferior team what their offense is capable of. I don't think Missouri is good at all. So I think LSU does that again. I think last I saw they were just about a 3-touchdown favorite in this. I think they cover, to be quite frank. I think Miles Brennan continues to play well at quarterback. I think this LSU defense shuts Mizzou down for the most part. I think that's an easy win for the Bayou Bengals. Number 22, Texas versus Oklahoma, noon on Fox. This is the least excited I have been for a Red River shootout in years, maybe ever, honestly, in my lifetime. Texas and Oklahoma, when was the last time you could remember Texas coming in number 22, Oklahoma coming in unranked? Just bizarre. It's bizarre, right? It really feels weird. Spencer Rattler, we talked a little bit on Monday's episode about Spencer Rattler for Oklahoma. He has thrown for a lot of yards. He's thrown for a lot of touchdowns, but the picks have come at the worst possible times. He has not managed to really perform well in the clutch for Oklahoma to this point in the season, unlike his predecessors like Baker Mayfield, like Kyler Murray, of course, who are both now in the NFL, both Heisman Trophy winners. I don't see it. I do not see it for Oklahoma right now. They're not looking particularly great. Texas, coming off the loss, of course, this past week to TCU, not looking particularly great either. This is really a coin flip game to me. I believe Oklahoma's coming in as about a field goal favorite. I have to say, based on what I've seen so far, I'm giving a slight edge to Texas in this one at the Cotton Bowl. I don't have a ton of faith in either team to win this game, but I am giving a slight edge to Texas, which would be really shocking because that would put Oklahoma at 1-3, including 0-3 in the Big 12 to start the season. Let's call it like it is. The Big 12, as we said on Monday's episode, is in turmoil. The Big 12 has nearly already played themselves out of the college football playoff. They are hoping that Oklahoma State is good right now, because if not, if Oklahoma State loses down the road, the Big 12 has officially, I think, played themselves out of the college football playoff. Their strength of schedule is going through the floor every day with as the conference continues to cannibalize itself, essentially. Texas, you could maybe put your eggs in that basket if they bounce back and run the table, but I don't think I see that happening from them or Oklahoma at this point. But I will take the Longhorns in the Red River shootout this year. UL Monroe at Liberty, noon on ESPNU. Not a particularly thrilling game. Liberty has looked all right to this point, undefeated. You can't argue with that. UL Monroe has been, simply put, the worst team in college football based on the way they performed on the field this year. I like the Flames to pick up a semi-comfortable win here. NC State at Virginia. Interesting unranked showdown in the ACC. This is noon on the ACC network. I think both of these teams are kind of middle of the pack this year, so maybe fighting to get to the upper half of the ACC in this game. NC State, of course, coming off the ranked win over Pitt. I think I actually like Virginia in this game, though. Virginia has looked all right to this point, honestly. They played decently against Clemson. NC State, as I said, is coming off the ranked win. I think they might come in with a little too high of emotion. I think the Cavaliers pick up the win here. South Carolina at Vanderbilt. This is noon on the SEC network. The Gamecocks, how shall we say this? They have shown a little bit of promise this year in the ways that I think I compare them to Tennessee last year at this point. Tennessee was having a hard time finding ways to win games, but they were hanging around in a lot of their SEC games against kind of similar level, maybe slightly better opponents. South Carolina, we saw hang around there against Tennessee for most of the game and then lose it. We saw South Carolina last week fall way behind to Florida and then battle back to give themselves a chance to make it close late. Poor clock management and ultimately a turnover at the end cost them that game. But South Carolina has been okay to this point. Vanderbilt, you have to say, is probably the worst team in the SEC this year. So if South Carolina can't go on the road and win this one, it is going to be a really long year for the Gamecocks. I have to give it to South Carolina here by at least a couple of touchdowns, in my opinion. I think this team has a little bit of a confidence builder against the Commodores on Saturday. We've got Duke at Syracuse, another unranked ACC matchup right here. 12:30. This one's streaming only, ESPN3. I am going to roll with Syracuse in this one. I liked the way Syracuse looked against Georgia Tech. I feel pretty comfortable saying this Syracuse team is at least middle of the pack. I don't feel comfortable saying that about Duke. I think Duke is one of the worst teams in the conference. So give me the orange in that 12:30 matchup. Army hosting the Citadel, of course, an FCS matchup here. I am going to give the edge to a pretty good Army football team who's been running all over everyone all throughout these first few weeks. They're 1:30 on CBS Sports Network. We move now into the midday time slot, and I will say this to me is the weakest time slot of the week outside of the top game here at 3:30. We've got some decent early afternoon games, some decent evening games, but this 3:30 slot is pretty lacking other than this first game here. So 3:30 on CBS, of course, the SEC on CBS. Game of the week, Georgia, number 3 Georgia, hosting number 14 Tennessee. When was the last time you could say Georgia and Tennessee was a top 15 matchup? I seriously cannot recall. I cannot recall the last time that happened. This Tennessee team has looked pretty legit. Like I said, they did not play their best football maybe against South Carolina. They looked like a complete team. They played a complete game against Missouri last week. I know it's Missouri. But this Tennessee team is showing that they are built to win football games, even if they are not quite on the same talent level as someone like Georgia, or if you want to go to the opposite division of the conference, Alabama, LSU, Auburn, teams like that. Tennessee is not as talented in terms of star rankings of recruits as Georgia. They're not even close, right? But this team knows how to win football games. They have some solid play on both sides of the line of scrimmage. They've got a great offensive line. They've got a pretty strong running back behind that offensive line as well. They've got competent enough quarterback play out of Jarrett Garantano to this point. I don't know if that is going to be good enough against Georgia, though. This Tennessee offensive line is going to get a little bit of a push. I think they're going to make a conscious effort to run the ball with Eric Gray, who's been very good to this point in the season. But this Georgia defensive front has just been a nightmare to run against over the last couple of seasons. I think that continues here on Saturday. So let's go ahead and say this is a Georgia Bulldogs win here for me. They are about a 2-touchdown favorite in this game. I actually think they probably cover on that. I feel comfortable saying that this Georgia offense has looked good enough for me over the last 2 games that they will be able to score a decent number of points on this Tennessee defense. I don't see this Georgia defense bending for any more than 14 points on Saturday. I think more likely they hold Tennessee to 10 or 13, somewhere in that range, and I think that Georgia offense, again, puts probably 30 or more on the board to me against Tennessee. UTSA at number 15, BYU. This is 3:30 on ESPN2. UTSA, listen, give them credit where credit's due. They have got some wins this year, right? They have strung together a few wins to start off the year. It comes to a screeching halt on Saturday. BYU is a legitimate top 15 team from what we have seen so far this season. The Cougs are going to drop at least half 100 on UTSA at 3:30. This is a win. This is a win for BYU. Zach Wilson, the quarterback there, has just been spectacular. This BYU offense is insane. They are going to win by a very comfortable margin on Saturday. Number 24, Iowa State hosting Texas Tech. This is 3:30 on ABC. I like Iowa State in this game, simply put. I liked what I saw out of Iowa State last week, picking up the win over Oklahoma, even though, as I said, Oklahoma has found ways to lose games rather than finding ways to win them early on in the season. This was an impressive performance by Iowa State, make no mistake about it. Last week, of course, they have the loss to Louisiana, the Ragin' Cajuns, on their schedule. But that's a good football team that they lost to. That, I think, is a legit top 25 team. And Iowa State doesn't have too much to be ashamed for. They can bounce back. They are still undefeated in Big 12 play. And I think after this week, they will put themselves right in that conversation with Oklahoma State for the Big 12 championship. Central Arkansas at Arkansas State. 3:30 ESPN3. Saw some folks on Twitter insinuating that Central Arkansas might have a chance at an upset in this one. I'm not seeing it. I like the Red Wolves. I know Arkansas State just lost an ugly one to Coastal Carolina recently, but I do like the Red Wolves in this game as a pretty comfortable favorite. Texas State at Troy, 3:30 ESPN3. I am giving the edge to Troy in this one. Texas State has had their moments where they have hung in there against better competition this year. They may do the same in this game, but Troy, to me, still is the better team. I like that Troy offense. I think they probably put up a decent point total in this one and pick up a win for the Sun Belt, or in Sun Belt play, rather. 4 p.m. on SEC Network. This one's kind of interesting. An interesting test, I think, of a top 25 team. It's number 13 Auburn hosting Arkansas. Arkansas, just a week ago, we saw break an SEC winless streak of over 2 seasons. They did not win an SEC game between mid-2017 and just last week against Mississippi State, who, of course, was ranked coming off the LSU upset. I like what this Arkansas team is showing us so far to this point. It has really been interesting seeing just how different they look out there, right? Just the effort that you see on every single play from this Arkansas team does not look like the Chad Morris era of Arkansas, or even, I would argue, most of the Brett Bielema era of Arkansas. This is a different looking Arkansas team to me, and that's without even having really the chance for Sam Pittman and all of his assistant recruits, who, by the way, or assistant coaches rather, to go out there and recruit as well. And by the way, he does have a great assistant coaching staff. Kendall Briles, for example, at the offensive coordinator position. I like this Arkansas coaching staff. I think that they have the potential to maybe play Auburn close in this one, but I do think ultimately Auburn is coming out with the win. I think Auburn is going to bounce back in this one. And I will go a step further than that. I'm actually going to say we've seen Arkansas, who came out tough against Georgia, and then Georgia ultimately obviously pulled away, won that one by 4 scores. And you take a look at last week's performance, Arkansas, of course, impressing in the win against Mississippi State. I think the Mississippi State game against LSU was kind of fluky, obviously throwing for over 600 passing yards. Anytime you do that, especially against an SEC defense, is going to feel kind of fluky. I'm not buying into that as being a true top 25 team necessarily in Mississippi State yet. As far as an overall football team, obviously the offense is there for them. But for that reason, I just have a feeling Arkansas takes a step back this week. I think Auburn maybe wins this one a little more comfortably than we're expecting them to. I could see them winning this one by 3-4 touchdowns in a similar fashion to what Georgia did to Arkansas in that game. So moving right along, we've got Pitt at Boston College, and let's just scroll down a little here on video. We'll try to fly through some of these later games here. Pitt at Boston College. Pitt, of course, just lost to NC State last week and dropped out of the top 25. Boston College has had some decent performances this year at times. This one's on ACC Network. I am going to take the Pitt Panthers on the road here. I do still think they're the better team. I think they are kind of a just outside the top 25 type of team right now. So Boston College, while they had a good win over, I believe it was Duke a few weeks ago, where they dropped about a 20-point win on Duke, I just haven't overall been impressed by this Boston College team. They had a close call against Texas State, for example, that comes to mind. So give me Pitt in probably a somewhat close game here. Kansas State at TCU, 4 p.m. on Fox. This is kind of a battle of two teams who are there right below the top of the Big 12. If you look at Oklahoma State as now the consensus favorite in the Big 12, Kansas State and TCU are not too far off. Of course, they both own big-time ranked upset wins. TCU just beat Texas last week. Kansas State beat Oklahoma a couple of weeks ago. I have to say, I like TCU in this football game. I liked what I saw out of them last week. Maybe I'm just going with the hot hand. Their upset is more recent. I do like this Kansas State football team, but I think TCU has the potential to pick up this win here and keep that momentum going, maybe into the top 25 if they were to pick up a win this weekend. We've got Florida International hosting Middle Tennessee. This is one of the least interesting or least sexy, at least, matchups of the week. FIU has been all right. Middle Tennessee has been bad. I do like FIU to win this game just because Middle Tennessee has been one of the worst looking teams in college football this year. So 4 p.m. ESPNU, give me FIU. We've got Southern Miss hosting Florida Atlantic. This one with no TV network listed here. I think this one may be a little bit in flux with the weather situation as well, depending on if they need to move the kickoff time or something like that. Not positive. Don't quote me on that off the top of my head. But Southern Miss finally bounced back from a rough start with a win last weekend. Preseason, I picked this team to be one of those Conference USA championship contenders right there with UAB. I picked UAB ultimately to win the conference. Southern Miss obviously has not lived up to that expectation. Florida Atlantic, though, hasn't been particularly great either. I'm going to get back, not on the bandwagon here, but I am going to get back on track a little bit with Southern Miss. I liked that they finally picked up the win last weekend. I think they're going to pick up a close, probably ugly win over Florida Atlantic this weekend in what would be, I think, a minor upset. We've got Temple at Navy, 6 p.m., CBS Sports Network. Not a lot to say here on this one, particularly Navy has looked very ugly at times, decent at other times. I think I like Navy still in this football game. I like them to bounce back in a way that they did after the BYU game. It's been just a roller coaster ride of a season for the midshipmen. Of course, they got blown out 55-3 against BYU back in their first game of the season, then bounced back with a win. Now they just got smoked by Air Force last week. I think this Navy team bounces back with a win. East Carolina at South Florida. This is 7 p.m. ESPN Plus. These teams are about on the same level. Honestly, flip a coin on this one, but I'm going to give a slight edge to South Florida in this football game. I think they have a little bit of an edge there. This is the big game of the week. The ACC's biggest marquee matchup of the regular season, possibly outside of Clemson Notre Dame later on this year. We've got number 7 Miami, who has looked great so far this season, at number 1 Clemson. This one in Death Valley is pretty darn exciting. This is one of the most exciting games, if not the most exciting game that we have seen on paper to this point in the season. I think there was a lot of reason to drum up some hype, of course, for Auburn and Georgia last weekend. But Clemson hosting Miami is going to be a big, big deal this week. This is a Miami team that has looked like a legitimate top 10 football team so far. And Clemson, who, of course, is the consensus pick to win that national championship by pretty much every outlet. I do have Clemson winning this game. I'll start there. This could be a really, really interesting football game, though, because Clemson, to this point in the season, you look at their games that they've had thus far, they have not just blown people out of the water, and they have not played really great teams. Look no further than their performance against Virginia. Kind of middling ACC teams Clemson has played to this point. They have not really been blowing people out, kind of these 20-point win type games, somewhere in that range. Miami has looked great. They've got a win over a good UAB team in there. They, of course, have blown out their lesser competition like Florida State. So I really do like this Miami football team coming into Death Valley. I would not count out the possibility of a Miami win here. I think the spread right now is Clemson by about 2 touchdowns. To me, I think it's going to be way closer than that. I think Clemson, as we have seen in the last several years over which they've been playoff contenders, what we see a lot of the time is they are tested only once or twice during a regular season. Normally, they have one kind of legit opponent on the schedule, and they also have one game that they definitely should win that tends to test them. This is one of those games, right? This and Notre Dame this year. We're going to see Clemson play, I think, 2 legit top 10 or at least top 15 quality teams outside of, maybe being tested down the road by someone else, someone a little weaker in the regular season. This is one of those type of games to me. I think Clemson in those type of games against big opponents tends to win them, obviously. They are a great football program, but they tend to win close. And I think that they win this one by a touchdown or less. I think it's a 7, maybe a 3-point win for the Tigers that probably comes down to the fourth quarter. Maybe they control it the whole way and never lose the lead. But I do like Clemson close. Number 2, Alabama at Ole Miss. This one will not, in all likelihood, be close. At Ole Miss, 7:30 p.m. ESPN. I believe the spread in this one was about 24 points. I do think it'll be closer than that, just based on what we've seen out of the Ole Miss offense so far. Ole Miss, and under Hugh Freeze, not Hugh Freeze, Freudian slip there, maybe. Lane Kiffin, of course, at Ole Miss as the head football coach. They have had a great looking offense. The defense is not really there. They just picked up a win 42-41 over Kentucky on the road this past weekend. They scored a bunch of points. In week one against Florida. Ultimately came up short in that one, obviously. But I do like Ole Miss to score some points, probably in the range of 4 touchdowns or so against Alabama in this game. I think Alabama, though, ultimately will, of course, win the shootout. Alabama will likely put up a whole lot of points as well, probably in that 45 to 50 range, somewhere like that. Florida State at number 5, Notre Dame, 7:30 NBC. This will not be pretty. Notre Dame in that number 5 spot right now. They have looked pretty good on the field thus far. Of course, they have had at least one game get postponed against Wake Forest a couple weeks ago. This Notre Dame team is going to obliterate Florida State on Saturday night. Florida State has looked horrible to this point in the season. Their only win was an ugly one last week over Jacksonville State, an FCS football program. Notre Dame, on the other hand, has looked very impressive. They have a ton of talent all over the field. This is Clemson's biggest contender, biggest foe in the ACC this year. The Fighting Irish will demolish the Seminoles. That's it. That's all I've got to say. UTEP at Louisiana Tech, 7:30 ESPN2. Louisiana Tech has not been as impressive as I might have thought, because they did just get blown out by BYU last weekend. But UTEP is not a good football team. Let's not kid ourselves. They do have a few wins, courtesy of some weak opponents that they've played. But Louisiana Tech is picking up the win here, probably pretty comfortably as well. Western Kentucky hosting Marshall, 7:30 p.m. I like Marshall to win this one. Western Kentucky has underperformed to this point. Marshall is someone that at one point was up in our top 25, has since been passed up on due to just some big upset wins where folks have jumped Marshall there. But Marshall is not a bad football team. I think they pick up this win here. Mississippi State at Kentucky, 7:30 ESPN. This is an interesting matchup because these two teams normally are on about the same tier. I think they still are on similar tiers for this season. Kentucky is a good team. Mississippi State is a good team. Are either of them top 25 teams? Probably not for me right now. I am going to give the edge, based on what we've seen so far, to Mississippi State in this football game, though. Kentucky, of course, played Ole Miss close last week. Did not really put up too much of a fight against Auburn in that football game. Let them run away late in that one. I like this Mississippi State offense to take care of business against Kentucky this weekend. And then the last game of the weekend, we've got Charlotte at North Texas, 8 p.m. ESPNU. Not a ton to say there, honestly. I like North Texas as a slight favorite to win there against the 49ers of Charlotte. Now, as promised, we will just get really briefly back into this Pac-12 schedule discussion. We talked a little bit about this on Monday's episode, but just taking a look here, we really only looked last week at Oregon's schedule, for example. Looking beyond that at USC, for example, on here, they're going to play Arizona State, Arizona, Utah, Colorado, Washington State, UCLA. You look at that schedule and you honestly ask yourself, who even could beat USC in the regular season this year? I don't see Utah beating them. I don't see Arizona State necessarily beating them, though you could make an argument there, I suppose. And it's certainly not going to be any of the others to me. UCLA looks like a win. Washington State, Colorado is maybe the worst team in the conference. Arizona is right down there as well. So it's a pretty straight shot to me, as we saw when the SEC schedule came out, you see unfair treatment perhaps for USC and Oregon getting an easier schedule. But yeah, it's kind of just an issue of those two teams getting a straight shot to the Pac-12 championship game, but I still just can't justify in my mind Oregon or USC. If they win out, they go 7-0. I cannot imagine a college football playoff selection committee choosing that team over an SEC runner-up, over someone of that caliber. And that's just my take on it, obviously. But I cannot imagine that scenario where someone like Alabama or Georgia or Florida is being left out of the playoff for an Oregon or USC who's only played a 7-game schedule. So that's about going to wrap us up for episode 77 of Upset Alert. Thank you so much once again for listening. For those of you live here on twitch.tv/robotbraineater, whether you're on YouTube later on in the day, whether you're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google, Amazon, wherever you may be, please do give us a follow on Twitter at Upset Alert Pod on Twitter. If you are listening on podcast services, please do subscribe, follow, and take the time to leave us that 5-star review on there. Greatly appreciate it, as it helps us get more eyeballs and more ears on the podcast. We are going to wrap it up, like I said, for episode 77. But thank you once again for listening. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And until Monday, we will see you later.